Repetitive negative thinking carves a channel in the mind. Whether we call it rumination or worry, the mental process functions like water over stone, running the exact same loops until the groove becomes a cognitive rut. Clinical psychology traditionally divides this repetition into two distinct categories. The first is rumination. According to the self-regulatory executive function model, rumination is a persistent, passive focus on the causes and consequences of your own distress. It is an obsession with past and present, analyzing failure without taking action to fix it. The second category is worry, which is the core feature of generalized anxiety disorder. Unlike rumination, worry is strictly future-oriented. Instead, it projects attention forward, obsessing over potential threats and worst-case scenarios that have not actually happened to you yet. Despite this temporal split, rumination looking backward and worry looking forward, they share the exact same structural flaw. In both of these states, the brain fails to shift from processing internal emotional distress to executing active, goal-directed problem-solving. Treating these two conditions as completely isolated phenomena ignores their shared architecture. Both are sustained by an unbroken, focused attention on unresolved mental distress. To map exactly how this continuous distress sustains itself in generalized anxiety disorder, researchers developed the intolerance of uncertainty model, often referred to as the Laval model. This model isolates a specific baseline vulnerability, intolerance of uncertainty, or IU. This is defined as a person's dispositional incapacity to endure the absence of salient, key information. It is the raw inability to tolerate the unknown. This diagram shows the Laval model's core structure. Intolerance of uncertainty does not trigger anxiety directly. Instead, the raw fear of the unknown passes through three cognitive mediators: positive beliefs about worry, negative problem orientation, and cognitive avoidance. The signal is processed, pushed forward, and converted into two final outputs: cognitive worry and physical somatic anxiety. For decades, clinical psychology has treated this cognitive pathway as a universal human constant. But when researchers apply comparative statistical stress tests to this exact architecture, the data shows that these mental pathways are heavily contingent on culture. To test the universality of the Laval model, researchers conducted an empirical bootstrapping study, examining the cognitive pathways of two distinct non-clinical cohorts, undergraduate students from the UK and Italy. To see what unites them, here are side-by-side baseline models for the UK and Italian cohorts. In both datasets, negative problem orientation successfully mediates the path from intolerance of uncertainty to worry. This pathway is active regardless of nationality. Goal progress theory defines negative problem orientation clearly. When individuals view ambiguous problems as highly threatening, they experience a sharp drop in self-confidence regarding their problem-solving abilities. Consequently, they halt all goal-directed action. Response styles theory explains what happens next. When active problem-solving is abandoned, the individual reverts to a passive, self-referent state. They get stuck analyzing how bad they feel about the unresolved problem, which fuels continuous rumination. Negative problem orientation proves universally resilient across these groups because it effectively severs the transition from repetitive negative thought to actionable problem solving. It is the cognitive roadblock that guarantees the worry continues. While negative problem orientation is universal, the models splinter when we examine the secondary cognitive pathways generating worry. In the Italian cohort, a second mediator emerges. Positive beliefs about worry bridges the fear of uncertainty directly to clinical worry. The patient holds a deep internal belief that worrying is a useful, protective coping mechanism, granting it a measurable statistical weight. Applied to the UK data, a structural anomaly appears. Positive beliefs about worry entirely fails to mediate the relationship. The node is inactive. Looking at raw statistics, the UK students demonstrated significantly higher baseline levels of intolerance of uncertainty and worry than Italian counterparts.
The researchers hypothesize that because worry is so deeply entrenched and established in the UK cohort, positive beliefs about worry have already fulfilled their initial functional role. The cognitive habit is fully cemented, so the positive reinforcement is no longer required to actively mediate the behavior. A cognitive trigger that actively initiates a disorder in one population can become mathematically invisible in another, simply because the second population possesses a higher baseline symptom severity. The Laval model also seeks to explain how mental stress converts into physical symptoms. To map this, the output variable shifts from the cognitive experience of worry to the physiological experience of somatic anxiety, measured using tools like the Beck Anxiety Inventory. In the UK model, we see a total failure to mediate this specific physiological path. None of the three hypothesized nodes successfully translate the intolerance of uncertainty into physical anxiety symptoms. The Italian model tells a completely different story. Here, a single specific node successfully bridges the gap between fear of the unknown and physical anxiety: cognitive avoidance. Cognitive avoidance is the active mental suppression or transformation of unwanted, threatening imagery. The subject deliberately attempts to block out fearful mental images to avoid immediate distress. But this suppression creates a paradox. By blocking the mental imagery, the individual impairs their emotional emotional processing. The fear is never actually resolved, which ironically sustains and heightens peripheral autonomic arousal, driving up heart rate, muscle tension, and physical panic. While a negative orientation toward problems drives the cognitive repetition of worry universally, the physical manifestation of that anxiety relies on entirely distinct, culturally active suppression tactics. Stepping back from the clinical regression coefficients allows us to analyze the macro-cultural drivers that might explain these deeply divergent models. Sociologically, economics and business science classify Italy as a strong uncertainty avoidance culture. This classification defines a population characterized by high resistance to change and a highly conservative approach to unknown risks. This rigid cultural profile aligns perfectly with the mechanics of the original Laval model. In a society strictly geared to avoid the unknown, individuals are far more likely to fully activate metacognitive defensive nodes, like leaning on the perceived usefulness of worry or actively suppressing fearful images to manage perceived threats. By contrast, the United Kingdom is classified as a weak uncertainty avoidance culture. Culturally, there is a higher societal tolerance for unknown risks, shifting economic variables, and general ambiguity. This presents a fascinating paradox. A society with higher baseline risk tolerance actually bypasses traditional metacognitive defensive nodes. The UK cohort does not rely on cognitive avoidance or positive beliefs about worry, yet they maintain significantly higher baseline levels of raw, persistent worry. Cognitive vulnerability is not purely biological. The way human beings metabolize anxiety is heavily shaped by their culture's macroeconomic and societal definition of risk. This data exposes a critical failure point in standardized mental health treatments. If clinicians assume a universal cognitive architecture, they risk deploying therapies that target entirely inactive psychopathological nodes. It outlines the absolute necessity of culturally calibrating interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy. Mental health treatment cannot function as a one-size-fits-all algorithm imported across borders without adjustment. Advanced clinical frameworks like rumination-focused CBT must first empirically map a specific patient's active pathways. A clinician has to verify whether they need to dismantle a patient's cognitive avoidance or restructure their negative problem orientation before attempting to disrupt their cycle of negative thinking. To effectively dismantle repetitive negative thinking, clinical psychology must stop treating the cognitive pathways of anxiety as universal biological constants. The map of the mind is not fixed, it is continuously rewired by the culture we live in.